Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Workland Distinguished Research Lecture this evening. My name is Amy Burns, and I am the Interim Dean of the Workland School of Education. I always like to say I'm like the dean that we have while we're waiting for the real dean to come back. So I would like to say, on behalf of Dr. Diane Garelick, who is off on a very well-deserved one-year RSL while I do all her work, that we would love to welcome you here and to welcome you to this research lecture by this outstanding academic. As we gather here tonight for this incredible event, I would like to start us off in a good way by welcoming you to the Workland School of Education on the beautiful University of Calgary campus in Alberta, Canada. It's important for us to know that because not only are we gathering here in this room, but we are also gathering online. And at last count, we were over 1,000 people online. So as I begin with our land acknowledgement for the University of Calgary campus, I'd like to take a moment and encourage everyone listening in tonight. I always tell people, find a window. Find a window and look outside and take a moment to reflect on the way in which we connect to the land that we work, play, and live on. And here at the University of Calgary, which is located in the heart of southern Alberta, we would like to acknowledge and pay tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. And the University of Calgary is situated on land northwest of where the Bow River meets the Elbow River, a site traditionally known as Mohkinstsis to the Blackfoot, Wishchispa to the Stoney Nakoda, and Gutsitsi to the Tsuut'ina. On this land and in this place, we strive to learn together, walk together, and grow together in a good way. And as we consider how we are shaped by the lands upon which we learn, play, and work, I think it's important for us to note that we are gathering from many countries across the globe. So please take a moment to think about how you connect to the lands where you are. And as we do that, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our speaker tonight, who is looking at artificial intelligence and future-focused learning. Now, I have a very formal, may I borrow part of your table? Thank you. I have a very formal introduction here that I'm actually going to struggle to read a bit because I know Sarah very well. So I am here tonight to introduce Dr. Sarah Elaine Eaton. And tonight's topic is Global Trends in Education, Artificial Intelligence, and Future-Focused Learning for 2025 and beyond. This topic is particularly relevant to the Workland School of Education as we are committed to preparing future educators to navigate the complexities of modern classrooms. Whether those students are undergraduates going into classrooms as teachers, graduate students who are looking to expand their knowledge base and think about new positions they might take up in K-12, or whether those are community members. We're all looking for ways to make a difference in the society that we serve. By integrating principles of AI and future-oriented pedagogy into the curriculum, along with concepts of ethics and integrity, the Workland School of Education aims to equip its graduates with the skills necessary to foster adaptability, collaboration, and critical thinking. Dr. Eaton's contributions not only advance scholarly discourse in education, but also inform practical strategies that will empower educators and students alike, ensuring they are well prepared to thrive in an increasingly interconnected world. The format for tonight is a lecture presentation by Dr. Eaton, followed by a question and answer. But before we do that, we have a few housekeeping items. For those of you in the room, the washrooms are located just outside this room on the west side across from where you checked in. If you are at home, I will trust you will find whatever washroom is closest to you. In case of an emergency, please calmly and quickly gather your personal belongings and exit the room from one of the 3 exits. Next, exit the building using one of the main doors. Now, as I introduce Dr. Eaton, you have to know that not only is she the recipient of the 2025 Distinguished Research Award for her groundbreaking work on global trends in education, specifically on the intersection of artificial intelligence and future-focused learning, but she is a prolific author. There are too many publications to count, so I won't. Instead, I would like to introduce my friend Sarah. Sarah and I know each other because we went to grad school together. Well, I might have been a couple of years older, but we won't go there. Sarah and I have known each other for over a decade and had the opportunity to work with the same doctoral supervisor, the late and wonderful Dr. J. Tim Goddard. Upon entering academia at full time here at the Workland School of Education, we came to share many interests in common. We have written together, we have co-edited a book, Women Negotiating Life in the Academy, and while we have taken slightly different paths, as evidenced by the fact that she is giving the Workland Distinguished Research Lecture, we continue to support each other and to find ways to lift each other up. Something I cannot stress enough as being important in post-secondary. And so with that, and with all kinds of other things I could say, she's part of this educational leadership, policy and governance specialization area. She's our chair of that area. She does incredible work with all kinds of different innovative ideas and technologies. What you really need to know is that not only do we have a research lecture tonight by an incredible scholar, but a wonderful person. And with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Sarah Eaton.
Thank you, Amy, for all of the lies that you told in the introduction. So they told me tonight that if I put the word plagiarism in the title, nobody would come. So instead, I put artificial intelligence. But we will talk about academic integrity, because this is a special opportunity for me to talk about one of my special interests, which is plagiarism. And I hope that by the end of tonight, if it's not already one of yours, that you'll be more interested in it than when you came here today. To start us off, a few ways that you can participate tonight. Of course, participation can be internal and external. Feel free to pause and reflect at your own pace. You can take pictures of any of the slides. You can share them online. You can post questions and share your thoughts. We'll have question and answers at the end. You can share on social channels. Please use the hashtag #postplagiarism. And then finally, you have printed copies if you're in the room of the lecture, and also you can download the lecture for future reference. It was published this morning in the International Journal for Educational Integrity as an open access publication. And I'll leave this up here in case anybody would like the QR code to download it later on. Well, I give a couple of special thank yous. Thank you to everybody who's in the room. Special thank you to the academic integrity researchers who are joining us tonight. When I started in this field, people said to me, you can't have a research career focused on academic integrity. It's an area of administrative practice, not research. You need to find a real research topic. You need to drop this right now. And I said, nope. Thank you for telling me that I can't have a research career on academic integrity. Now watch me. And here we are. So special thank you to my community of academic integrity researchers and scholars. The second big thank you is to the students who are current, the students who are past. For me as an educator, there is no greater honor than having students actually want to spend time with you outside of class. So special thank you to the students. So let's get to it. Students have been cheating since the beginning of education. Correction. Humans have been cheating since time immemorial. Both of those statements are true, and there's a plethora of research to support both of them. But one of them might have hit you a little bit harder in the gut. When I said, students have been cheating since the beginning of time, in that phrase, students are the bad guys, and of course the good guys are the teachers. When we say humans have been cheating since the beginning of time, we don't really know who the bad guy is and who the good guy is. The story gets confusing or boring or both. But when we have a good guy and a bad guy, we have a good story. So we're going to tell some stories tonight. What Dr. Burns, Amy, didn't mention was that one of my goals of tonight's talk was to bring together my training as a humanities scholar with my training as a social scientist. So you're going to see elements of both of those worlds tonight. So, good guys and bad guys. In the story about academic cheating, the students are the bad guys and the teachers are the good guys. Let's follow that through within a literary world, what we would call a narrative arc or a story structure. There are variations on this. This is a simplified version, but it starts like this. First, we have the exposition or the introduction. We find out who the characters are. We set up the story, the context, the problem, the drama. Then we have the rising action. And then from there, the story hits a peak. Then we begin to wind things down. And finally, we have a resolution. A pretty basic story structure. So now we have the good guys and the bad guys, and we have the story structure. So let's tell a story about academic cheating. Thank you to the University of Calgary for this photo of an examination hall. So this story might be one that you already know. Let's consider our student in this story, Alex. Alex has to go write an examination. Alex knows that without those cheat sheets, passing the exam is not going to happen. Alex knows it's wrong, but still, Alex brings the cheat notes into the examination. And meanwhile, there's a teacher at the front of the examination hall who knows that at least one student has to be cheating. There always is. Well, we know who that student is, Alex. We've set up the story. So Alex goes into the exam, brings the cheat notes. The teacher looks around the exam hall and suddenly says, "Gotcha, I found you." Hauls Alex up by the scruff of the collar, takes him out, and then finally there's an investigation and Alex is expelled. That's a complete story that fits the classic narrative arc. Now, let's deconstruct it a little bit. You might not have liked the outcome. You might have preferred an outcome in which Alex is forgiven and then becomes a kind of prodigal student who learns better. That's a different story outcome, but it also happens. But before we go any further, let's stop and check our biases. What did you think of when I said the student's name was Alex? Did you think of a male student or a female student? I purposely chose a gender-neutral name for that story. But who came to mind? When you thought of the heroic teacher that catches the bad guy, the cheating student, did you think of a male student or male teacher or a female teacher? I can tell you that when I asked an artificial intelligence app to generate this photo of a heroic teacher that catches a student cheating, what came up always was a male teacher. Even though education is dominated by women, when it comes to heroic figures, often we think of men. And in terms of who are the good guys catching cheating students, very often the stereotype that comes to mind is a man. So pause for a moment and think, when you were imagining this story in your head, who were the characters? What did they look like? The stereotypes that we have around academic cheating are quite prevalent and they remain entrenched. The story that I told you about academic cheating has been going on for centuries. There's nothing new there. There were no surprises. In the end, Alex was caught and there was a punishment inflicted. But I will invite you throughout the presentation to think about the stereotypes that we hold when we think about who cheats, who catches cheaters, and who gets away with cheating. Since this is a research talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about some research that I've done. My very first project here as an assistant professor was looking at some academic integrity policies across Canada. I worked together with colleagues across the country in different phases. We looked at 96 institutions across Canada, colleges and universities, and 160 documents around policies and procedures. That's the boring bit. I promise there won't be too much of the boring bits tonight. But for the researchers in the room, I have to throw in a little bit of this stuff. So we looked at all of the policies and all of the procedures around academic cheating across Canada, and what did we find in terms of how do we address academic cheating in Canadian post-secondary institutions? Well, we can break it down into 3 main methods in terms of how we address academic cheating. Basically, we have a punitive method, an educative method, and a restorative method. Most of us will be familiar with a punitive method, otherwise known as a crime and punishment approach. In other words, an academic offense is committed and there must be some kind of sanction or punishment, a reduction in the grade, you get a 0, you fail the course. This is also what we call a progressive discipline model. Second and subsequent offenses get harsher punishments. With enough offenses or a bad enough offense, something like buying a paper from a term paper mill, that in some schools can be cause for immediate expulsion, called exclusion in some other places. And focusing on this word of exclusion can be useful, because if a student does enough bad things, we throw them out. We tell them, you are not good enough to be part of our community anymore. You're excused. Administratively, these are easy to monitor and track. The number of cases come in, the punishments are tracked. It's very easy to produce a report. Another possible method is an educative method, a little bit kinder, knowing that much of the misconduct that happens is because students lack academic literacy skills. So we can help them learn them. We can give them workshops on citing, referencing, paraphrasing, etc. We can help them build up as students so they can be academically successful. This approach seeks to reduce repeat offenses, and it's relatively easy to track. We can tell how many students went to workshops and then how many reoffenses there were. This is pretty common in Canadian higher education. In fact, a blended model that includes both punitive and educative responses is normal. In our study, we found at the time that we did our study, one university in Canada, that was Grant MacEwan at the time, took a restorative approach to academic misconduct offenses. This is a bit of a different approach for those who are unfamiliar with it. This approach seeks to repair harm. And you might imagine, who's harmed in a plagiarism case? Well, often, teachers might feel harmed, they might feel angry, they might feel let down, they might feel a lot of different things. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But basically, the end result of a restorative resolution isn't that the student is excluded, but that they are included. Because the ultimate idea is to ask, what will it take to keep you included in our school, in our community, so that we can trust you and you can trust us? This is expensive, and it's time intensive, and it's worth it. This doesn't work in all cases. The individual who's found responsible must be willing to accept responsibility, and if they don't, we can rely on the old punitive measures that we had before. Another way to look at this would be those punitive measures that we're all so familiar with, they date back to the time that education was sort of introduced at mass scale during the Industrial Revolution, roughly paralleling colonial education. So another way to think about this is a kind of scale from most colonial to most decolonized. The one that is most trauma-inducing to the one that is most trauma-informed. Most of our universities in Canada do not take a trauma-informed approach to academic misconduct. One question that I have is, if our universities say that we care about decolonization and indigenization, why are we not using restorative resolutions for academic misconduct or other forms of misconduct? The one question I have is, if we care about decolonization, what are we waiting for? We have work to do when it comes to modernizing our approaches to student conduct and how we deal with cheating students. I can tell you when ChatGPT first came out in November of 2022, I was getting emails, Facebook messages, LinkedIn messages, Twitter messages, because we still use Twitter then, saying, what are we going to do about this plagiarism machine? I thought, oh goodness, what are we going to do? So let's talk a little bit about how artificial intelligence and technology can have an impact on academic misconduct. But thinking about these three main ways to address misconduct and how we can do better in higher education generally, because we have the research to show that restorative resolutions work and help students build as a person and as a student, but also keeps them as part of our community. This approach, the gotcha approach, you heard me use it in the original story that I told about Alex. Teachers going, aha, I've caught you cheating, gotcha. This has been talked about in the academic integrity literature for a long time, and the hero teacher has found the bad guy. I've got you and I'm going to punish you. One of the scholars who's influenced me in my work is a woman by the name of Rebecca Moore Howard, and she talks about how this approach of gotcha is really quite harmful for students and destructive. Might make us feel good as teachers for a minute though. But instead, Rebecca Moore Howard says, don't police, just teach. And she infuses this in her writings over and over again. And tonight I wanted to pay a little bit of homage to Rebecca Moore Howard because her work has influenced me greatly. Because I can tell you that the academic integrity literature is pretty divided. There's still a lot of people out there that want to catch the damn cheaters. But she's not one of them. Instead, she encourages us as educators to do what we've been trained to do, which is educate, and leave the policing to other staff members or others on our campus. But our job is not to hunt down our students. In our research, we looked at the reasons why teachers don't report cheating. We interviewed, this was a qualitative study, limited, there were 17 participants, but we found some reasons why teachers don't report. One, we don't actually have any universal definitions of plagiarism or cheating. Different universities have different ideas of what does it mean to plagiarize or cheat. So when I hear things like ChatGPT is a plagiarism machine, the first thing that comes into my mind is, how are you defining plagiarism? Because it might not be how other people are defining plagiarism. Because cut and paste plagiarism, that really didn't exist before the internet. And certainly the output of a Gen AI app is nothing that we can cut and paste from somewhere else. But generally, if teachers think that the policy is too harsh or too lenient, they won't report it. They might do something else. They might keep it to themselves. They might give the student a warning, but they might not go through official channels. For a couple of reasons. Reporting is stressful for educators. There can be all kinds of emotional labor that's included here, psychological labor. Educators may think, what will happen to my student if I report them? Am I going to jeopardize their future? Am I going to jeopardize my own future? Am I going to be fired from my job? Limited in terms of my promotions, called a troublemaker? Our research participants told us all of that. So educators themselves may fear retribution or retaliation. And in a study done by one of our PhD students here at the University of Calgary, Paul McLeod, that I worked with him to publish after he graduated, he surveyed more than 400 professors across Canada, and more than 40% of them reported that they do not report academic cheating. So when we think about the teachers that do report academic cheating, who are they reporting? And who's not being reported? Who's getting off with a warning? Some of the research that's not on this slide will show an overrepresentation of certain kinds of students in the academic cheating data that we have. So students of color, students who speak English as an additional language, students who may be neurodivergent, may be reported more often and punished more harshly than their peers. So of the faculty that are reporting, who are they reporting? We don't have the answers to all of those things. But we saw a couple of spikes in terms of like the big history of cheating. One was during COVID-19. Rates of reporting went up. And then when ChatGPT came on the scene, rates of reporting went up. So it's one thing when teachers don't report as a form of they want to protest. But it's another thing when teachers take things into their own hands. I'd like to share this story from Canada that appeared in the news less than 1 year ago. This is from the Sioux Times. This is a former university professor from Algoma University who decided to literally take matters into his own hands when students plagiarized. He offered the students a choice. He said, either I can report you for cheating and you can be expelled, or you can accept an alternate form of punishment. The alternate form of punishment was corporal punishment. And the students who accepted that were taken to his home. He drove the students to his home, took them to his basement, and beat them with a stick, or gave them a literal kick in the ass. And this was not just one student. It happened over and over and over again until it was finally reported to the police. Charges were laid, criminal charges were laid, and the professor pled guilty to assault. So, when teachers don't report, we have to also ask what's happening if there's alternate forms of punishment. This is one case. This is an isolated case. It's an extreme case, but it's an important case, and it's worth talking about because it just happens that all of the students who were flagged for plagiarism were international students of color. International students who were far away from their families and their homes, learning to navigate a new system. None of the students flagged in these cases were white domestic students from Canada. So, racism, stereotypes are not only alive and well when it comes to who gets reported for academic cheating, but we also need to think about who gets punished and why, and how can we leave the system better than we found it. So, if you felt a kind of visceral reaction to this, that's normal, because in the story of academic cheating, that was a plot twist. The teacher became the villain. The students were the victims. The police were the heroes. So when we flip it around and make the villain someone else, it changes the story and creates a little bit of dissonance for us. So now we can have villains who can be heroes, villains who can be teachers, but we like things to work in threes. So the other kind of villain that we have, well, that's technology. Technology has long been seen as a villain in education. I draw here and am inspired by the work of Amy Orban, an educational technologist who talks about the ways in which technology has impacted society and learning. One of the examples she gives in one of her papers is a 20th century technology that sent ripples of panic across society, caused people to think that children would become stupid as a result, and that technology was the radio. And after that came the technology for the television. That was my generation. I remember my dad plunking me down in front of his favorite TV show, which was Star Trek. Live long and prosper. And my mom coming in the room and saying, "Get her away from that box, it'll make her stupid." I like to think Dad won that fight. But after that came the internet, and that was the dawn of cut and paste plagiarism, right? There have been various technologies through the years. Actually, just about every generation has a technology that makes people think it will make kids stupid, and they'll cheat with it. Amy Orban has this quotation that is worth sharing. So she talks about the Sisyphean cycle of technology panics. So like Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill for eternity, she says technology panics are the times in which the general population is gripped by intense worry and concern about a certain technology. These panics are influential and reoccurring, generation after generation. Current worries about new technologies are surprisingly similar to concerns about technologies that have preoccupied parents and policymakers in the past, but are met with amusement today. Notice that you all laughed when I talked about the radio. Met with amusement today. So, building on Amy's work, Amy Orban, not Amy Burns, some things we know about past technologies might include the world did not end when the new technology was introduced. The radio, the television, the internet, ChatGPT. We'll keep going with our top 10 here. Kids are not stupid as a result of the technology. If they were, I wouldn't be standing here today. We know that young minds are not corrupted, at least not by technology alone. Other things may come into play there. We know that moral turpitude did not become the norm, at least again, not because of educational technologies. We know that there were no massive job losses or economic collapse. That's the job of the politicians. We know that above all else, technology after technology, kids still need great teachers. Whether you're teaching kindergarten or you're teaching PhD students, our students need us to be there for them. Human creativity continued to thrive, so we have not lost our ability to inspire each other or be creative. This is fun. We know that over time, the panic about a new technology subsides, and then the technology eventually becomes part of everyday life, and finally, we wonder how we ever lived without it. Could you imagine a future in which we couldn't live without artificial intelligence? It's coming. Yes, some of you are nodding yes, and some of you are saying, please no. So there is probably a day coming where we might can't imagine how we ever lived without AI. And when I'll say AI, I'll mean artificial intelligence here, although in my heart it's academic integrity. So these are things we know about past technologies. Also things we know about current technologies and future technologies. Current technologies that we have vilified, cell phones, gosh, you think that we would have already dealt with that. I know in the Workland School of Education here we have a colleague, Dr. Barb Brown, that is regularly invited in the media to talk about how cell phones are not going to make kids stupid. And then we have screens as some vague, vilified evil, all screens everywhere. We're surrounded by evil in this room. By the way, we have 7 screens in the room, maybe more at the back. So the screens are a bad thing. And then finally, ChatGPT is this sort of ubiquitous term, like we use Kleenex or Scotties in Canada, or Xerox if you're as old as I am, right? So we'll talk about ChatGPT or AI as interchangeable, and I understand that AI is not Gen AI, it's not machine learning. We won't get into all of that tonight. But just to say that artificial intelligence apps have been vilified, continue to be vilified. People continue to be afraid of them. We have not yet reached the stage where we wonder if we can ever live without it. It's probably coming. So, I mentioned Rebecca Moore Howard as the plagiarism scholar who influenced me, and she said with a colleague of hers back in 2009, trying to legislate the wired world simply won't work. And yet, we continue to try to legislate it, to put in policies. We talk now about guardrails when it comes to artificial intelligence. It's a little different than legislation, but for years people are saying we can't legislate the internet, and yet here we are. Now is probably a good time to talk about the academic integrity arms race. This has been written about for a long time. I'm going to refer to this from my generation when I first started teaching, which was the internet. So if you weren't teaching at the time of the internet, you might think about artificial intelligence. But imagine this, a new technology comes onto the scene. People have different reactions to it. They're excited, they're fearful, all kinds of different emotions, worry. And then we try and figure out, as we move to the green swirl on the top, teachers and students try and figure out how to use this technology for teaching, learning, and assessment, and experimentation, and fun, and mischief, and cheating. I like to say that the internet just made plagiarism faster and more efficient. I have a colleague here in the room with me, long-standing colleague. I'm going to give a shout out to Mike Dabrowski because I remember 30 years ago, Mike and I were laughing in the hallway as a colleague asked us if we could turn it off. And we said, the internet? No, you can't turn the internet off. And here we are, he's here 30 years later at this talk. It's great, thanks. But then what we see enter the scene are anti-cheating technology companies. So you might know these as plagiarism detection companies. And so another colleague here who regularly tells me that some of these companies don't like me very much. That's okay with me. So the companies come on the scene and they make us promises. They tell us that they can fix the academic cheating problem. They have the technology to help us catch students who are using technology to cheat. And if only we bought their licenses for hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, instead of paying more staff, that we would be relieved of our academic cheating woes. So more technology is developed to help catch students cheating. We now have 30 years of anti-cheating technology, and the rates of misconduct have not decreased. So my question to you is, who wins in an academic integrity arms race? Because we know that our students, above all else, are smart, and they find workarounds. The number of YouTube videos, Reddit chats, social media posts on how to get around plagiarism detection software, there's millions of them. And probably just as many chats now about how to divert around so-called Gen AI text detection software. It doesn't work. Don't waste your money or your time. So above all else, what I can say is students don't win in the academic integrity arms race, but the companies that try and sell us their products, they win because they continue to vilify students and play on the centuries-old story of the arc of academic cheating where students are the bad guys and we have to catch them. So I often, when I work with organizations, schools, and universities, I say, don't spend your money on tech, spend your money on people who can help students learn to be the best version of themselves. But we see this academic integrity arms race playing out again and again and again. And now it's ChatGPT, and 30 years from now, it'll be something else. Can you imagine what that technology might be? We're not there yet. Maybe by the end of tonight, you'll have a clue. So, one of my things that I'll say is the promise of academic cheating detection software will always fail, because cheating is not a technology problem, it's a human one. So, trying to use tech to catch students cheating is a waste of our time and a waste of our money. Going back to the 10 points around new technologies, remember that key one, teachers are here because learners still need great teachers. Learners don't need anti-cheating technology. So, thinking about artificial intelligence a little bit. So I mentioned at the beginning my background is as a humanities scholar, and it was around 2019 that I really started to pay attention to artificial intelligence. I've always been tech curious, but together with some colleagues, Jason Weens, Bob Brennan, Brenda McDermott, Beatrice Moya, assisted by Rahul Kumar and others, we have a teaching and learning grant through the University of Calgary. Thank you very much, University of Calgary. We worked with over 400 participants, and we asked them if they could correctly identify an AI-generated text or a human-generated text. Participants were able to correctly identify when a text was written by an AI app about 36% of the time. It's not great, is it? And participants were able to correctly identify when a text was written by a human about 45% of the time. So when someone comes to me and says, I know my students use ChatGPT on this assignment because they used the word delve. I'm a human, and I use the word delve. In other words, more than 400 participants were correct less than half the time when trying to guess whether a text was generated by an AI or written by a human. Our ability to detect is much less than what we think it is. So, detection software, limited at best. Human detection, probably worse. So, what we might think about is how do we go beyond our current notions of cheating? Inspired again by Rebecca Moore Howard's call to take plagiarism out of policy, I thought it's probably not going to happen. So what can we do? Some of you will have seen this infographic before. Some of you are seeing it for the first time. I'll go through this. There's a lot of writing on the text. Don't pay attention to the writing. I'll take you through step by step. And if you have heard this before, thank you for your patience. So thinking about Rebecca Moore Howard's call, don't police, just teach, and throw plagiarism definitions out of policy, I thought, what would that look like if we threw it out of policy? It's not probably going to work, but what if we transcend it? What does that look like? That might look like life in a post-plagiarism age. So people have asked, what's post-plagiarism anyway? Well, I'd like to think that it's an era in human society in which advanced tech is a normal part of life. A normal part of life. including how we teach, learn, and interact daily. Not a cheating part of life, not something to punish students if they use it. Advanced technologies as a normal and integrated part of life, and it's an intellectual era in which we interact daily with advanced technology. So, the 6 tenets. Human AI writing will become normal in the same way that using spell check and grammar check are normal today. That we will work with artificial intelligence, I want to say apps, because more and more they're being integrated into our technologies. We're a Microsoft campus, we have enabled Microsoft Copilot. The idea of going to an external app like ChatGPT, that's so 2002. We don't have to do that anymore. We still do. I like to say that Claude is my work husband. Actual husband is here. Claude, by the way, is another large language model that I use quite regularly. But the idea of co-creation with AI, co-writing with AI, is likely to become normal if it's not already. And I'll stop and give a little pause here. I wanted to give a shout out to my colleague Rahul Kumar, who has taken these 6 tenets and tested them. He surveyed people and said, do you agree with these statements or not? You can find his article online. It's great. Because not everybody agrees with all the statements, so that's fine. It's a model. We don't have to agree with everything. But the idea of trying to determine where does the human end and where does the so-called robot begin might be something that we can't actually do, as we can take a draft, remix it, revise it, such that the end product is neither fully written by a human nor fully written by an AI. So this idea of hybrid human AI writing becoming normal is something I think we can reasonably anticipate. But having said that, there's no evidence to suggest that our ability to be creative is in any way threatened. So I'll take a little pause here and say, for me, it's important to decouple the idea of humans' ability to be creative from those who make a living from creative enterprises. So I recognize that the Hollywood writers' strike related to AI and the letters that were written by people like Margaret Atwood and others about their copyrighted works being used to train large language models are important conversations. And they are a big part of the ethical dilemma that we face when it comes to AI. But that's a different conversation than, is our ability to inspire and be inspired by each other in any way threatened by these apps? I contend that no. That is part of what makes us uniquely human, and that our ability to be creative is boundless and inexhaustible. And for our students, we can encourage them to be creative through all of this and to experiment, because that's part of the fun of learning. So the idea of language barriers being overcome was one of the next tenets here. Now, I can say when I first posted this on social media, a colleague, Mahabali, was pretty adamant in terms of critiquing the language that I used here. So I've left it in the infographic because that's how it was in the original, but saying that I could have nuanced this better when I said one's first language would begin to matter less and less. I wasn't trying to say that one's first language would become unimportant, but rather that the barriers that divide us would disappear. So I may have been biased by the Star Trek Universal Translator a little bit. However, I have just ordered a pair of AI glasses that will, say if you are speaking in, Ukrainian, you could speak in Ukrainian, the glasses will translate it for me into English, and then I will be able to reply in English. They just didn't arrive in time for tonight's talk. It would have been so cool. But the idea of AI being able to help us overcome language barriers, it's already here. So that's the fun, creative side of things. But then let's get to the ugly stuff, the academic misconduct stuff. I think when we're dealing with academic cheating and artificial intelligence, we can sum it up in one easy line. As humans, we can relinquish control to an AI app, but we don't relinquish responsibility. Humans remain accountable for the work that we submit, whether it's to a teacher or a boss or a client. So whether we have the AI app help us or do the work for us, in the end, what we submit has our name on it, we're accountable for that. When it comes to teaching and learning, we want students to use AI to supplement their learning, not to circumvent it. And that's an important distinction. Because for me, as a plagiarism scholar, attribution will always remain important. And I'm going to differentiate here between attribution and citing and referencing. Citing and referencing is a technical system set up with a lot of minutiae around it. And sometimes when people hear I'm a plagiarism scholar and they hear me say things like, I couldn't give a flying leap about whether it's one space or two after a period, or a sentence case or a title case, capitalization, who cares? I don't care. And certainly having come from literature where I learned MLA and then had to come to education where I learned APA, that's a special kind of trauma. But the idea of attribution and giving people credit where it's due and honoring the teachers who came before us, so you've heard me mention a couple of mine tonight, that will remain timeless and inexhaustible. And if you ask me, focusing on attribution is also aligned with our principles of decolonization, because focusing on the technical minutiae of citing and referencing is probably more about behavior control and rule compliance than anything to do with plagiarism. So the more that we can ask our students, how do you know what you know? And who do you know it from? And who are your teachers? And why does that matter? Then we're getting at the ethos of attribution. Maybe one day we can throw out the style guides. That would be a great outcome of post-plagiarism, and I'll be right there burning that book. Sorry, it's never good to burn a book. Okay. All right. But all of this to say that our historical definitions of plagiarism, cutting, pasting, those really no longer apply anymore. But the problem is that we don't have anything to replace them with yet. The jury's still out on that. And we're figuring this out together. But thinking about the ways that we have treated cheating, this is an invitation to think about new ways of helping students learn while still holding them accountable for their behaviors, but ways that we can help them grow and focus on the human learning. Because AI is not going anywhere. It is here to stay. And the apps are only going to continue to get more sophisticated and more embedded into our everyday technologies. This infographic has now been translated into about a half a dozen languages, so I wanted to give a shout out to the friends and colleagues and students who have voluntarily translated it into Spanish. Thank you, Beatrice. French, thank you, Elaine. Russian, thank you, Fuat. Mandarin, thank you, Gengian and Wei. And Persian, thank you, Sarush. So more and more people are starting to think about post-plagiarism as an alternate or new way to think about academic integrity that focuses first on pedagogy, teaching, learning, supporting students, and less on punishment. Pedagogy over punishment. This is the post-plagiarism world that we're living in. So, I recently gave a talk and someone said, but you didn't give the priorities slide, so you need to include it, and then proceeded to quote the slide back to me that I hadn't actually included in the slide deck. So for that person, I'm including the slide. So our priorities tonight will be prioritizing compassion over content. The internet can give us the content. Gen AI can give us the content with fewer and fewer errors every month. We can prioritize decency and treating our students with dignity rather than completely and only focusing on deadlines. One of the things I learned throughout my teaching career was to focus a little bit less on deadlines. And if a student needed an extension, I gave it to them, and the sky didn't fall. So the old adage of, when you grow up and you're in a real world, you'll have deadlines to meet, I beg to differ because I ask for extensions all the time and usually get them. So that's not to say I'm suggesting anarchy in any way. And I'll give a shout out here to another colleague in the Workland School of Education, Meadow Schroeder. She taught me a great little tip that I continue to use today. She gives her students a get out of jail free card on her course outline. So any student can ask for an assignment to be handed in 7 days late, get out of jail free, no questions asked. She tells me anecdotally that most students do not use their get out of jail free card, but they like knowing that they have the option if they want to. And if they do decide to use their get out of jail free card, she gives it to them. No questions asked. That's the deal. And I thought, wow, what if we could prioritize that sense of letting students just dial back the pressure valve a little bit so they can focus on their learning because life happens. And finally, prioritizing pedagogy over punishment. So thinking about our world as educators, these are things that I would like to suggest that as AI continues to advance, we can hold tight to these. So thinking about the future, the topic of tonight's talk, in preparation for tonight, I asked some of my students, what do you think education will look like in 2035? So they might be biased because they were my students. I will say not all of their responses can be included tonight because there were so many of them and they were so long and beautiful and detailed because we only have an hour tonight. They told me I only have an hour. So if you are one of the students whose work didn't get highlighted on the slides, please know it is included in the booklets that are on the table in person, and it is also in the written version that folks had the QR code to at the beginning. So every student who contributed has their voice in the written version. But tonight I wanted to pick out 3 just to highlight. So the first one that we have is a first-year PhD student, Gangyan Tang. And Gangyan says that by 2035, education will shift to an era of human-machine integration, where AI and teachers collaborate as equals. Is that exciting? Maybe for some. Teachers who fail to foster creativity and critical thinking will be replaced as interactive AI teacher partnerships become the new standard. So this was Gangyan's thought as a first-year PhD student. But I really like that he talked here about fostering creativity and critical thinking. Those don't go away. Gangyan, as one example, still sees these as being important in the future. And then we have Bibek Dahal, PhD student, who says that many technological devices we currently use for educational and research purposes will become outdated by 2035, including the end of big screen devices like computers and laptops. So when I get those AI glasses, I'll let you try them. And this is as portable devices with perfect language translation abilities will be available. By the way, the students gave me their perspectives before Christmas as I was preparing the slides, and already now we have technology. We didn't even have to wait till 2035 for this to be here. And then finally, Crystal Turner, another PhD student in the Workland School of Education, says, I must admit that given the current circumstances, I'm a little down with how education will look in the near future. I think we're in for a few rough years of underfunding and heavy-handed institutional involvement that only serves to promote neoliberal values. Those who hold the power to make changes aren't listening to those who are voicing their concerns about the education they've experienced and the education they need to be successful in the world. I hope that by 2035 that the darker times will be over and that education will again be valued for the good it does for our society. So I've shared 3 different perspectives here. And for me to reflect on these, plus all of the other ones that were written in the printed version, I noted that there were a variety of student perspectives. Not everybody was excited about technology. And I think that's probably still true today. Not everybody's excited about technology today. There were varying levels of hopefulness about the future. And that kind of hurt my heart a little bit, because I like to think that one thing we can do for our students is give them a bit of hope about the future. And student after student identified that the future is unlikely to be problem-free. Other students mentioned things like the climate crisis and the political situation. That was in December. So their future is unlikely to be any less complicated than it is today, and that the young people who are going forward from here will continue to face challenges that we haven't even yet thought of. So it was interesting for me to see that not all students were excited by AI, and they weren't all clear on how good or bad the future might be. So if you ask me what's coming in the next 10 years, I would say, well, no one has a crystal ball. But if we pay attention to the signals, we already have signals about what is coming. In 2021, UNESCO released a report on ethical issues in neurotechnology. So if that term is new for you, I'll define it in a minute. 2 years later, they released another report talking about the risks and challenges of neurotechnologies for human rights. So neurotechnology as the next wave of artificial technology. So, in case you're unfamiliar with it, neurotechnology providing direct access to neural circuits of the central nervous system for the purposes of recording neural circuit activity, reading, or altering neural circuit activity called writing, to register the potential to register and alter the inner workings of human reality. So this definition is from 2021, the same year that UNESCO produced their first report. And you may already know of a subset of neurotechnology. Brain-computer interfaces have existed for years for persons, for medical purposes. So used for persons with Parkinson's, for example, and for the deaf and hard of hearing, a cochlear implant is a kind of neurotechnology. Might not be informed by artificial intelligence or driven by artificial intelligence, but neurotech has been around for a long time. The difference that we're seeing now, we'll get to the difference in a minute. So, Nature Electronics in 2023 proclaimed that brain-computer interfaces were the technology of the year in 2023. Were you paying attention? I wasn't. I've started to. So, we have UNESCO saying that neurotechnology is the next big ethical challenge in education. We have publications, scientific publications like Nature, saying that this technology is already 2 years old, was the technology of the year 2 years ago. But I would contend that most of us in education, we weren't paying attention to this because we had our knickers in a twist about ChatGPT. And while we're worrying about one thing, technology continues to advance. You may be familiar with a product that Elon Musk has been developing called Neuralink. So the first human implant was implanted into a human in January of 2024, and it was implanted into an individual who was quadriplegic and allowed the individual to have some movement and use their brain to do certain things with a brain-computer interface. Neuralink's brain-computer interface is fully implantable, cosmetically invisible, and designed to let you control a computer or mobile device anywhere you go with a surgical implant. Think about the possibilities of academic cheating. So one of the things I like to say is if you are a Bachelor of Education student today, or you have recently graduated and you're a new classroom teacher, it's not unthinkable that this will be part of your future. Assuming you start your teaching career in 2025, and have a teaching career of about 30 years, by 2055, don't you think that this kind of technology will have advanced beyond what we might have thinking today? It's plausible. Because one of the things that we can think about is that this kind of technology has been specialized and medicalized. It's now becoming commercialized more and socialized. But it's not problem-free. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of neurotechnology that has been used in ways that might be ethically questionable. In this case, by the way, the villains are not the students, they're the researchers. So there is a company called the Biocybernaut Institute that ran some, see a couple of people are chuckling here in the room, ran some experiments with these headsets where they affixed electrodes to students, young people in Canada. This was from 2014 to 2016, so a decade ago. And invited students to take part in this research, and the owner of this private company indicated to people that it would make them smarter, more creative, less anxious, able to speak to angels, and levitate. I'm not kidding you. This was reported by CBC reporter Jeff Leo. Jeff reports a lot on ethical issues in education. And so when I saw this article, I knew that it was going to be well-researched. It just happened that this institute, the Biocybernaut Institute, did this research in Canada, in Prince Albert, with 12 to 16-year-olds, if I recall correctly, and invited them to take part in this, their parents, their caregivers, and then fixed these electrodes to their room, locked them in the dark for several hours without letting them out while they were collecting data. Oh, and by the way, it just happened that all of the kids in this research were Indigenous. So, private companies running the research around these, they don't have to adhere to the same research ethics that we do in the university context. So that was the whole point of this article, was to illustrate how private companies are conducting research with brain-computer interfaces that has no ethical oversight. So that was about a decade ago. So let's fast forward 5 years from then to 2019. Across the ocean in China, there was another study being conducted with these little fancy headsets here. This was the BrainCo study in China. This study was conducted with 10,000 school children in China. The promise of the technology company was that it would help students focus better, make them better in school, increase their attention levels, and the teachers could monitor the students' attention levels in real time through a console at the front, and then could send parents a report at the end of the day to say how well their students had paid attention in class. At the end of the class, the teacher could read aloud the names of the students who were the most attentive and the least attentive. Allegedly, this experiment all happened with parental consent. Maybe. The experiment was eventually stopped in some of the news reports because we don't have research reports on this. Everything we know about this particular study was reported in the media. Some of the students reported having to wear the headsets all day in class was uncomfortable. And further reports showed that some parents beat their children if they were identified as paying insufficient attention in class. So this kind of technology is problematic, and yet it's also commercially available already. So I like to think that thinking about the next wave of artificial intelligence and neurotechnology isn't preemptive, or is preemptive rather than speculative. This isn't something to do with Star Trek. One of the reasons I wanted to share these examples with you of studies that have already happened is to show that this isn't something new. It's just that we haven't been paying attention. But as we're not paying attention, companies are already developing technologies that can help kids allegedly become smarter, pay more attention, with things like the emotive 14-channel wireless headset. By the way, we have one display on the room tonight. It's not available for testing just yet, but we have our own research study here at the University of Calgary that has been approved, fully approved by our Research Ethics Board, and I can assure you they are rigorous. And we have our research team here because we want people to have a chance to see this technology and test it. By the way, this is commercially available technology. Anybody can buy this off the internet. Our headset cost us about $1,000 US. So if you happen to have an extra $1,000 US hanging around, you too can buy one, use this at your kitchen table to figure out how your brain waves work. So the prices will come down as they always do with educational technologies. Our research team contends that most people won't even have this on their radar. We want to give people a chance to try it, check it out, use it, and give us their feedback on what do you think this will mean for the future of education? Is it good? Is it bad? What do we need to be paying attention to with regards to things like dignity, human rights, mental agency, those kinds of things? What are the things we need to pay attention to now so that the teachers who are teaching in 2035, 2045, and 2055 have the skills and knowledge they need to help those students be the best versions of themselves? So, in case you're interested in participating, I have permission from the Research Ethics Board to invite you to participate in our research study should you wish. You must be 16 years or older to participate in this study. And there are a few conditions under which we would not accept research participants, but if you're interested, there's a QR code. If you don't know what a QR code is, then we have our research coordinator, Christina. Give everyone a wave, Christina. You can go chat with Christina at the end. She can get us set up with a time to schedule to try the headset. So those of you who are watching online can't see that the photograph that you see on the slide, we actually have the demo model here in the room. This is the actual headset that would be used as we conduct our research. So we don't have the means to try it tonight. Please don't ask us. You have to sign up for the study. But you can at least see it if you want after the talk. So we believe, our members of our research team believe that the apps that we have today for AI are going to continue to evolve and be wearable and implantable. And that is the future of artificial intelligence in our schools and in our society. This is the future we want to prepare our students for, as well as our teacher trainees, because those are the classrooms that they're likely to face in their professional practice. So as we're starting to wrap up, let's go back and think about the story of the structure again. introduction, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. I would like to contend as we're wrapping up that it's time for a new story, the one in which the students are the heroes of our stories. It's time to stop vilifying our students because they are the stewards of our future. Tonight you heard me quote some of my students who talked about education in the future. If you are an educator, I implore you to ask your own students, what do you think education and society will look like 10 years from now? And when they tell you, listen to them, because they are the stewards of our future, which is only going to get more complicated and not be problem-free. So, as I wrap up, I'll do so with a call to action, thinking about preparing for the possibilities of tomorrow with the students we have not yet taught or even met, technologies we're not yet even aware of. So if you didn't know about neurotechnology before tonight, please go away and talk about it. Check out the headset if you're here in the room at the end. Most of all, wicked problems that do not yet exist. If we looked back 10 years ago to 2015, who could have predicted COVID-19? Who could have predicted ChatGPT? Who could have predicted the political reality that we're living in? So by 2035, what are we not able to predict today, but that we need to prepare for, and more importantly, prepare our students for? So I'll conclude with this call to action, say that the future belongs to our youth, and as educators, let's ensure that they're ready for it. And that's all I have for you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. I have to tell you, as someone who's still a little afraid of their computer, I must say that I found it fascinating that you and I, the year that you are the Distinguished Research Lecturer, and I had the opportunity to introduce you, that it should be about artificial intelligence. Because Sarah does know about me that I reluctantly tried ChatGPT last week. This was my big step in.
It's a good step.
Thank you. Yes, I knew you'd be proud. But what it really does tell me is that as an educator, in which I do have a lot of experience, we're entering into a time that I think could be compared, as you said, to when educators, at any point in time, when there's been a big change. And I was having this discussion with my 80-some-year-old mother who taught for almost 40 years, junior high. Yes, you can applaud, that would be fine. She remembers when the calculator was going to destroy math. It was just going to destroy everything. And yet here we are, right? And now we can't imagine a time when we didn't have them. Now, I will say I find the concept of wearing the calculator in my brain a little scarier, but I do think that there are these moments in time that we all have these forced leaps forward, and we have to go with those. Okay, so with that, I'm sure everyone has a number of questions. Here's how this will work. I am going to run madly around the room with this microphone, happily, to provide you with the opportunity to ask questions. We will also be having some questions coming from online. Is there anyone who'd like to jump in first?
Maybe while you're running around with the mic, I can comment on one thing that we didn't get to cover in the slides tonight, and that is historically, when the technology has been supervised by a teacher, we've considered it okay. And when students have used technology without teachers' permission, then we consider it cheating. But we're now at a point where we can't really control students' use of technology. I think that's actually kind of exciting in some ways, because you mentioned the calculator, and those who know me in the room will know that I stink at math. You pointed out those books I wrote. Okay, that's fine. When it comes to language, I'm good, but you put me in anything to do with math, oh yeah, that's bad. So I'm really grateful for things like the calculator, and thinking about the ways in which technologies can be used as assistive or adaptive technologies in ways that students can become agents of their own learning, and we don't have to supervise when a technology is allowed or not allowed based on some medicalized tests. And I want to just give a shout out to Brenda McDermott because I've learned everything that I know about the social model of disability from Brenda McDermott. Thank you. And thinking about the ways that students can use tech to become the best versions of themselves without us having to oversee it, that's really exciting.
Wonderful. Okay, we have a question here.
Hi, Sarah. I wanted to ask you about the study that you're doing right now. And I'm wondering, you mentioned that this headset could monitor brain waves. And I'm wondering, does it have implications, for example, for dealing with the problems we're having right now with anxiety in young people? Could you control that possibly? Do you see any future hopeful possibilities in that area?
The firm answer is maybe. I think what I worry about more is companies that try and sell us products that claim that their technology can solve students' anxiety or whatever the case might be. I think the jury's out, but I worry about, like, there are already, watches that will tell us how many steps we take or what our heart rate is, right? A student could theoretically look at that device during a final exam and say, oh, my heart rate's high. I need to take a breath and I need to calm down. Is that cheating? Some people might say yes, because that student has an unfair advantage over other students that don't have the smartwatch. And other people might say, no, it's just telling them their heart rate. But thinking about who has technology and who doesn't have technology to do certain things, I think is another big question that we can tackle. But in terms of, do I think that there might be apps or wearables that could tell someone, you're anxious, you need to be mindful, check your breathing? Yes, that's plausible. Do I think that there's a whole market out there for companies that can sell us promises around that? Oh, hell yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Here's another question.
Hello, this is Catherine. I'm a newcomer to the university. My question applauds from what you said about restorative paradigm of teaching or of judging students and so on. But have you ever imagined a time when education is full of sharing, not merit?
I can imagine a time, yes, when education is focused on sharing. Yes, I'm not sure that our current systems are always set up around that, right? We have grades and we have to assign grades and students have those recorded. So a possible future in which we focus only on learning is a bit of an ideal. And I'm not sure how that would work, but I like the idea of it.
Wonderful, thank you. We have a question online. So the next question is, what about anti-cheating technology as the protagonist as a teaching tool, not a gotcha application?
Sorry, say that again?
Yes, you bet. It's kind of half question, half statement that you can respond to. What about anti-cheating technology as the protagonist as a teaching tool, not a gotcha application?
I can't even imagine what that would be like. The anti-cheating technology is the protagonist. I suppose if we were to use some of these technologies in a formative way to help students check their writing, and have they been able to, thinking about a text matching technology that allows you to see if a text has been copied and pasted from another source without attribution, to help students learn, oh, I need to put quotation marks around this, to learn technical aspects of citing and referencing. If it's only used in a formative way for instructional purposes, I suppose it is possible. I shudder to think about the possibility of a technology that replaces a teacher, though.
Great, thank you. Okay, Sarah, here's another question for you.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Hugh.
Well, what a wonderful presentation. And I found myself in the journey of learning and getting excited about the utility and the possibilities of AI and all things that technology can offer. I felt reassured by the reminders of human dignity and human rights and ethics. But I'm also sensing that you did not emphasize too much on ethics in a way that we know it. And I'm wondering whether perhaps you are on a tangent of thinking about post-ethics, uh, thinking about AI. And then the other aspect that I would like to also put on the table is that there's such thing as Frankenstein, or at least in the fiction world. And I wonder if you would dare to think about the possibility of us getting to that part and scenario, and what kind of guardrails do we have to think about?
Oh, it's a big question. Thank you for the question. So when you talked about Frankenstein, I imagined like a patchwork piece of writing, not an actual Frankenstein human figure. And you reminded me of a plagiarism case that I dealt with in my own career, where the copy and pasting from the internet was in this paper, and I found it because the font in the paper was different colors. And different fonts from the different sources that the student had plagiarized from. So that was a Frankenstein kind of paper, and the paper made no sense in the end. So thinking about, like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and the idea of, that monster in the end was created by someone and was as much to be pitied as potentially a villain. So there's a lot to unpack there. I hope that ethics are always at the foreground of this conversation around technology, because the ethical complexities are not going away. And the 2023 report from UNESCO highlighted the threat to human dignity from neurotechnologies and brain-computer interfaces if it's misused. So we saw the one example there where parents were sent reports if students were not performing adequately with the use of this technology. I think there are real possibilities for the technology to be misused. Thinking about technologies that already exist, for example, and the debates about the use of, say, cochlear implants, and parents making a decision to have those implanted, say, in a deaf child from a young age, and later the individual might not have wanted that. The idea of who has agency to make decisions for themselves, medical decisions, educational decisions. And as this technology becomes less medicalized and more socialized, I can imagine a possible dystopian future in which such an implant could be put in a child by a parent without the child wanting it. And that will be a big ethical complexity. We're not quite there yet, but thinking about the good and the bad and the really ugly will be important parts of the conversation.
Thank you. Okay, here's another question from our audience, and then we'll go to an online question.
Thank you so much. I work in K-12, so we're catching. We're kind of all in the catching phase of the plagiarism checker talking. So I love your talk about educationalizing. My question is, a lot of my colleagues are worried about losing their jobs when it comes to the education, even in the near future and the far future. And I wholly disagree with that, because the article by Palmer, The Heart of a Teacher, is what I believe education is, essentially. So I'm wondering, do you feel in your research, or have you found that our industry is welcoming to artificial intelligence? Or do you think that we will be our own worst enemy in adapting or bringing it in or integrating, where it's like a conflict?
I think that the jury's out on the big question. There was a big AI conference in Calgary a week or two ago, and questions like these came up. And there are universities, for example, that are using AI full on as tutors. And you might imagine for, service level courses that AI can be used for tutoring. But one of the interesting things that was brought up was the idea of a human can get to a certain level and a technology can get to a certain level. And when you have those two work together, the human can achieve more than it could on its own and more than the AI could on its own. So the idea of us working collaboratively with AI is possible. Will teachers ever be replaced by AI? I hope not, because the affective parts of teaching, the human part, is still really at the heart of what we do as educators, and the relationality is a critical piece of what we do. And at the end, I mean, I don't necessarily remember what kind of calculator I used in grade 8, but I do remember the teachers I had in grade 8, and I hope that that's still something that we can keep for our students in the future, because relationality and human interaction will continue to be important.
Thank you, Sarah. We have an online question, and I'm going to give it to you in a couple of ways here. You can choose how you want to address it.
Uh-oh.
So the actual, oh no, it's all good. And the actual question is, how have pre-service teacher programs changed to prepare them for the future? You might also consider, how do they have to change to prepare them for the future?
This might be better directed to my colleagues who teach mainly in the undergraduate, the Bachelor of Education program, but I think it's kind of a symbiotic relationship, because we're at the point now, I heard this great phrase this week, and it was the idea of we are all first-generation AI users. So whether you're a student or a teacher, we're all kind of figuring this out together. And I think there have been generations past where the teacher's always known more. And that has been a kind of security blanket for us. And that security blanket, the threads are being worn out now. So in terms of how are we preparing our BEd teachers or BEd students, I think probably the answer is as best we can, as many of us try and catch up with the new technology. And we have people who are really comfortable using tech and people who are really not. And I think that's okay. To some degree, because there's certain skills that will still always be human skills. When I go to the doctor, I want my doctor to know the anatomy. I don't want them to have to look it up on an app. I still want, it's true, right? There's still things that we need to internalize in terms of the knowledge. And I think one of those things to internalize are the social skills and the soft skills. So for people that may not be all that comfortable with technology, there will be other strengths in those people as educators, their ability to have good relationships with people, and they'll be able to bring the strength to the BEd students, the teacher trainees, because then those teachers are going to go into their classrooms and need to deal with all kinds of different people.
Wonderful. I will say, prior to this year, I was the associate dean of our undergraduate program, and one of the things I often said to our students was, there's a child somewhere just waiting to meet you because you're going to be their favorite teacher. And they don't even know that they're waiting to meet you, but they are. And I don't think that will ever change. Excellent. Another question for you right here.
Hi, Sarah. I work in K-12 as well. I'm an early adopter, AI lover, working at my school to educate both teachers and students about how to leverage it as a tool, as an assistant, tutor, etc. However, I am curious to hear what you have to say to people like me and to the teachers who are somewhat resistant because of the almighty diploma exam. And students need to be able to do this independently. They can't use AI because they won't be able to use AI in that test. This is their reality. This is what I'm facing when I'm trying to show them how, especially in our population, which is very neurodiverse, this can really help our students, and a lot of resistance is there. So I'm curious what your words of advice would be.
I'm not sure I have any advice. It's tricky, right? Because we all have to work within the systems that constrain us. And so there might be a future in which diploma exams or standardized tests don't exist. That would be a great future. But we're not there yet. In terms of AI can't help them on those tests, well, not yet, but wait till those AI glasses get here. Because when I was watching YouTube videos about that, the YouTuber was saying, yeah, people are writing to me asking how they can cheat with these glasses. And I can tell you, they don't look any different from most eyeglasses that we see today. So, yeah, I think AI will have an impact on that. Will educational systems be ready for it? I don't know. To your question of how do you have conversations with folks who are conscientious objectors, shall we say. They might always be conscientious objectors. I think in a way, it's not necessarily about us as educators, it's about the students that we teach and how can we help them bring their best selves to our classrooms and to the world. So it's not about my personal opinion, it's about the kids and the students that we're here for.
Okay, another question?
Hey, Sarah.
Hi, Dora.
So I teach courses for people who want to teach second languages, and it can be K-12 or to adults, and teaching second languages or additional languages. And I really struggled with the whole AI thing 3 years ago, as you know, and I was trying to think of a way to incorporate that into my classes and with my students, because they all seem to be quite afraid of doing that. And so every single class I have them exploring AI. So they have to do a project or a paper, activity, a task, something where they're exploring it. And it's amazing how they go from this place of fear and apprehension and so on to really, really reflecting on the pluses and minuses to this. I wonder how much of that happens in general. Like, how much are people doing this in academia and schools and so on? Do you have any ideas?
I don't think we have any data on it, but thanks for sharing that example of how you were kind of afraid by it and you tried anyway. It's I think it's a really reassuring example that we can try little things and see how they work, right? One of the things I think we can do better in general in education is letting teachers fail. And so if we try something new and it bombs, that's okay. We can try it again or we can revise it. That's an important part of our profession. But the idea of having students work with AI in a way that's not taboo, that you're supervising it and you're guiding it, is really important so that they know that they're not necessarily left on their own. I know that when I work with graduate students, right, one of the questions I'll ask is, how comfortable are you with this technology, right? Knowing that if you upload something to ChatGPT, for example, it may become part of its training model. When companies tell us that whatever we input to those models is not used for training, but I can also say to students, here's an example. A student came and said, what do you think of my research question? I'm like, well, it wasn't in my area. For example, I was on the students committee, not their primary supervisor. So this isn't my area. I said, here's some things I think you could work on. Would you consider uploading this research question to ChatGPT and getting feedback on it? What are the strengths and weaknesses of my research question? How could I improve it? And the student said, sure, why not? I'll give it a try and I'll let you know how it goes. And came back and said, well, you identified these 3 things in my research question, and AI identified these other 12 things that I could improve on and gave me some possibilities for an improved research question. I was like, wow, it did better than I did. But he still wanted the conversation with me, which I thought was excited. But the thing was, we created a space where it was okay for the student to experiment, and then came back and reported back to me about what worked, what didn't, what they liked, what they hated, and where to go next. And I think that was what you exemplified in your example too.
Okay, we have an online question for you. Just as technology skills tend to provide a competitive advantage, example, how to Google something, at what point should AI literacy be a core part of all faculties?
This is a dream. AI literacy is a part of core. Wow, that's fantastic. And I know that there's folks here at the University of Calgary that would love to see that happen. And I understand, if I'm remembering the AI conference that a number of us went to a couple of weeks ago, I think that AI literacy as a competency is being explored by the OECD. And if you were at that conference, if anyone can nod or shake their head, I think that will become part of one of the literacies, right? So it was years and years ago, we talked about literacy as a language thing. You either knew the alphabet or you know how to write, or you didn't. Then there was a time in Canada where we talked about 9 foundational skills that we had that included literacy and numeracy, basic technology skills. I see a few of you nodding that worked in literacy in the room, right? So this idea of literacy as being multidimensional and multimodal, it could well be an extension of technology literacy, knowing that there's still people that don't know how to use a computer mouse or trackpad. So yes, I can see those skills as being necessary in the coming years.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, we have another question right here.
Sarah, you talked about the punitive and the educative approach to cheating, to academic misconduct. You also mentioned restorative approach, and I'm wondering, can you give us a bit of a taste of what that might look like?
Yeah, I can. So, yeah, the question is a bit of a taste of what a restorative resolution to an academic misconduct might look like. So, I will say that I have never used this in an academic misconduct case. I've taken basic restorative practice training through the International Institute for Restorative Practices, I think it's called. And the idea of there being a restorative conference or a meeting with a student, or a person who is alleged to have done something wrong, and they have an opportunity to hear from others how their actions impacted them. So it might be, in this case, a teacher, classmates, or others, and have an opportunity to listen to, oh, here's how my action impacted this person. So, for example, sometimes when a student plagiarizes, they think this is a victimless crime. No one gets hurt from this, without thinking that maybe their teacher is hurt. They might get angry. They might feel like a failure as an educator. They might think that they've wasted their time. They might feel disrespected. But sometimes there's a lack of awareness on both sides of that. And then for the individual who then has become aware of how their actions have impacted those in the community around them, can propose a way forward, a resolution, an apology, a way to make things better, so that at the end the trust is restored, and that everybody understands that what happened did impact people, but the point is not to eject somebody from the community, but to keep them in a way that they can be trusted and that they can trust others. And there might be, after a restorative resolution, an agreement about what the next steps are, and there might be a time where people come back together to check to see if those actions were taken. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. We have another question online. This one says, one near future probability is that AI will be more creative than us, and that it will not be tools, but agents with purpose, drive, and intention of their own. Do you have any thoughts on the implications of that for educators?
Ooh, that's exciting. I wasn't anticipating that question. That's part of the fun. A time in which AI is more creative than humans. Maybe it's differently creative than humans. I wonder when we say things like more creative, like how do you quantify creativity? I know there's probably people who've done that. Maybe differently creative, and the agents working together. Is that possible? Yes. How? Yes, that is possible. So that's something it's edging towards my ability to imagine that, but I suppose it's possible. Like, is there a possible future in which the Star Trek, the Enterprise's ship's computer makes all the decisions? Yes. We've watched that.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. I do have another online question, unless we have someone in the audience. Okay. How do you think advancements in technology could help or not reduce educational inequality between countries such as Brazil and Canada, for example? Could they instead widen the gap?
Yes, it's one of the problems that it has existed with EdTech for decades. The access to the technology, the financially privileged having more access to technology. So I mentioned, for example, this headset that we have in the room is available for $1,000 US. So those who have financial privilege will continue to have privilege, will continue to have more access to technology, more opportunities for training. So we've already seen educational disparities between the global south and the global north. However we might define that, knowing the definitions are problematic, but nevertheless, it could be that the gap continues to widen. Yes, that is a possibility.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask a question while I'm getting to the other side of the room here.
Okay.
But this is actually my question.
Yes.
What advice do you have for leaders in education who will need to find ways to embrace and work with AI and encourage others to work with AI, even when they themselves are still struggling to figure it out?
That's not a personal question at all, is it?
No, not at all.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to do a number of talks in different places now, and every single place I've gone, there are people that are really tech fluent, shall we say. They are comfortable with technology, they love it, and they're often more than willing to share their ideas and their knowledge with others. So leveraging local level knowledge and expertise, whether it's through local level workshops, is one possibility. A couple of years ago, I gave a talk at a conference and they had an AI playground. So they set up 10 computers in a room, and there was an advocate or an expert with each computer. Each computer had a different AI app installed on it, ChatGPT, Magic To Do, different ones. So nobody had to sign up with an email address. It was all there for people to try, and they got a chance to test out these technologies for themselves over a lunch hour in a playground type environment. And the people that were really excited by technology got a chance to showcase and leverage their knowledge. But leveraging the local level knowledge is something I think we can all do at very little cost or effort.
And stay friends with Sarah Eaton. Okay, next question.
Sarah, you have such an optimistic vision of the future that gives me hope. But I wonder if you envision a future where we move away from writing as the main evidence for learning, because we're kind of trapped in this cycle as an English teacher who spent a lot of time marking students' papers and wondering if they're reading what I'm saying. Like, is this actually the best way to understand if students have learned? Is generative text AI a chance to maybe push into project-based learning, experiential learning, or maybe even an oral exam? What are people saying about other ways of understanding whether students have learned and not just good writers?
I love this question in part because I love writing. But I also think that we have almost pathologized writing as the way of transmitting or showing knowledge, right? And so if I'm gonna give a shout out here to Phil Dawson because he talks about cognitive offloading, and he shared this example going back to the ancient Greeks, and I forget who the characters were, but I think it was Socrates who was suspicious of writing because if you wrote it down, it meant that you didn't have the ability to remember it. And so he talks about that as writing as a way of cognitive offloading or remembering. And century after century, we have become more and more dependent on writing to the extent that it is like considered the greatest epitome of our way of being able to share knowledge. And in thinking about oral storytelling cultures, whether it's the ancient Greeks or indigenous cultures or other cultures, we have almost, thrown away our sense of value around oral knowledge. But I think that there's an opportunity to elevate that and amplify it. And yes, my view of technology is optimistic, but there's some caution there and some caveats. And I think we also have these priorities in education around decolonization. And if we think about how do we elevate and amplify non-Western ways of knowing, and make those just as important. So if we think about storytelling, for example, as one way of sharing knowledge rather than only writing, then that might give us some hope. If you had asked me a year ago, I would have said oral exams could be one possible way of circumventing cheating with ChatGPT and AI language apps. Now that we have things like the AI glasses that can have a script in front of your eyes, that may not be the case anymore. But thinking about ways that we can incorporate stories, experience, etc., such that the transactional nature of the assignment, you give me an assignment and I give you a paper, we can somehow disrupt that. I think that would be an important part of it. But I would like to see thinking about ways that we can continue our commitments to decolonizing education, not quite as an antidote for artificial intelligence, but as a way to sort of soften some of the fears that we have around it. Yeah, so I think that we'll need to hold those different priorities and in tension with each other, because as AI continues to develop, that doesn't mean that we throw away our commitments to, say, the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We still need to think about ways to decolonize. And in doing so, thinking about how we might not pathologize writing so much. I don't know how to do that though.
Okay, I have another question, and this is a bit of an interesting one because it's coming in via chat from someone in the room.
Okay, that's fine.
This is
That's okay.
intriguing.
That's okay.
On your tables, you will notice that there are likely some laptop, I'm out of arms, so laptop stickers
Yeah.
that say you have integrity. If you want to look on your table, I'm sure you will find a small stack of them. So the question is this. I'm in the room, but entering my question via the chat. I see some laptop stickers around the room. Can you tell us about them?
Yes, we can tell you about them. So for those of you who are in the room, you will see you have these laptop stickers. These are laptop stickers that we use during our Academic Integrity Week campaign for our students, and it's become our institutional slogan for academic integrity. Most of our institutional slogans start with you flourish, for example, and a few years ago, a group of us came up with you have integrity, and it starts with the idea that our students already have integrity. They already come to the University of Calgary as whole and complete human beings who have the ability to make great decisions around integrity. So it's not for us, Academic Integrity Week isn't about catching cheaters. It's about reminding our students that you are already whole and complete human beings and you have integrity. So I can say that I was recently at the Calgary airport, had to take out my laptop out of the bag and put it in the bin, and an airport staff member said, "Are you a prof at the University of Calgary?" Because she recognized the You Have Integrity sticker. So yes, please take these tonight, put them on your laptop. They work great on luggage as well, by the way, to identify your suitcase. I like to think this has prevented my suitcase from getting stolen, as it reminds people in the airports or elsewhere that they have integrity. Don't steal my suitcase. So please take this, and as you do, you can have conversations with your own students and others about how integrity means to be whole and complete, and you already start out with integrity.
Wonderful. And on that note, we'll go to one last question, and then we will wrap up our evening.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, John.
I have a question about the relationship between these technologies and learning, and specifically with respect to students, right? So in your infographic on post-plagiarism, you talk about, in the top left-hand side, about rethinking the relationship with technology in a more kind of collaborative frame, right? So I'm going to write a paper and I'm going to shoulder to shoulder with ChatGPT. The question I have has to do with, if you're doing that, you've achieved a certain level of intellectual development.
You think?
That, well, I know it.
Carry on.
But presumably, our students, depending on where they are in their intellectual development, may not be there yet. And I'm thinking about Bloom's taxonomy here, right? So that, which assumes that you sort of have to go through some developmental processes in developing your intellectual skills, right? Before you can, synthesize things, you have to have learned how to comprehend things, right? Is there a potential problem with encouraging the shoulder-to-shoulder collaboration too early on in students' learning, so that I find myself talking to students about, be careful about outsourcing your thinking if you're still at the comprehension stage. So what would you say about that?
So overdependence on the technology is one of the concerns. And in my world, I can say folks are having a heyday with pulling apart Bloom's taxonomy. And thinking about the ways that creativity can be incorporated earlier and earlier. So yes, overdependence is a concern. And I'm going to maybe draw from some colleagues in Australia, Margaret Behrman and Rosemary Luckin. They talk about assessment in the age of artificial intelligence. And they talk about, instead of focusing only on content knowledge, evaluating and assessing two particular skills. One is students' metacognitive skills about themselves and knowing themselves as learners and becoming aware of themselves as learners. And the other is something they call evaluative judgment, which for them is more than critical thinking. It includes a student's ability to know when they have produced quality work. And that includes understanding what quality means in a subject area or a discipline. And to do that, they will need the constant coaching. Because we've, in education, we've all had work from students, and the student says, it's great. And we're like, yeah, no, it's not. So in that case, a student may not have cultivated their evaluative judgment. So helping students understand what counts as quality can be part of what we evaluate in the age of AI. How we do that is part of the puzzle I think we're trying to figure out.
Here. Hello, there we go, everyone. If you could please join me in thanking Sarah Eaton for a wonderful evening. As we wrap up our evening tonight, I would just like to let you know that I have been told there are still some excellent nibbles on the way out. Please feel free. And we have this space until about 7 o'clock, so feel free to say hello to the person across the room that you haven't seen in forever and didn't know would be here. And Sarah, as always, thank you for the incredible learning, for the opportunity to think deeply, and for the really wonderful presentation. Thank you for coming, everyone, and I hope you get home safely and soundly. Thanks so much.